actually my third interview with Jordan from Rendered Retina Theatre Company, so I'm feeling blessed, grateful, honoured to have the opportunity to speak to him again, because I feel like every time I speak to him, I learn so much from him, and he genuinely just changes the way I think about life, my career, acting. Like, he's got so many different experiences to share, and he shares them so honestly about what it's like being an actor, being part of a theatre company, and I think it's just so valuable. So all of the other parts that we've done will also be linked below, so make sure to go check them out afterwards, because I've genuinely gained so much myself from speaking to him, so I hope other people do too. And here's part 3. So I'm very excited to welcome back Jordan from Rendered Retina. Hello.
Hey, Lottie. Thank you for having me back.
It's nice to have you back for a part 3, because I feel like I always have questions to ask you.
No, happy to. I mean, it's obviously it's a it's flattering to like keep being asked, and it's great that you come up with so many like really actually interesting questions as well. So thank you.
Thank you. um, I feel like I always take your advice into like all my kind of work that I do. Um, so I wanted to ask you about how you started getting into your work and like finding the people that you're going to work with. And like, I know you've had composers who you've brought into certain projects. So how do you find the right people and people who will actually stay? Because I feel like if I was going to make something, I would have the risk of like doing it wrong and everyone leaves.
Yeah, I mean, oh, right. So I think the first thing that that we look for, I suppose, is that we look for people that we know we get on with
Yeah.
as not like first and foremost, you need to be somebody that we can gel with as a person. Because if you're going to be in a creative space with somebody, you need to know how they kind of work, how you interact kind of outside of that space.
Yes.
And then that, because we find that that energy then brings a brilliant kind of collaborative dynamic into the creative space. So generally, the way that we find people to work with is that we meet them through doing things. And I know it kind of sounds contradictory in a way. It's like you need to work with people that you know you are good with, but you
Yeah.
find them through doing other things. And it is kind of, you'll hear it all the time. It's not what you know, it's who you know. So
Yes.
what tends to happen for us at least is that we will, I don't know, do a piece of work or we'll work somewhere and we will meet somebody in that process. And that might be, say, another artist that has been working on a different show. And we might see that show and we might, meet them after the show and have a chat with them, be like, talk about their process, all that kind of thing. And then inevitably, you kind of start to move away from the work aspect and then you start to actually talk about life and kind of actually just have the jokes as a person, as a human being. And it's from there that we kind of go, I'm going to remember you. I'm going to remember this conversation we had. Because a lot of the time, it's not the things that like you meet somebody and you don't immediately go, oh, I've got a job for you, or I know exactly like what you can do for
Yeah.
us. A lot of the time, those relationships actually will come back later in life. So even, for example, we've worked with people who, we went to college with, or even we went to school with, and just so happens that, we've gone on completely separate paths through life. And then just at a later date, we go, oh, you're composing music. So our composer who worked on the soundtrack for Form, for example, we knew him. He was kind of like a friend of a friend, and we'd had a couple of interactions, and then we ended up working with him outside of theatre, just in while we're in part-time jobs at the time. We ended up working with him. And at that point, we were like, oh yeah, you make music, don't you? He was like, oh yeah, I do. And he was like, and I know that you guys make theatre. Like I've seen some of your stuff. And it was just kind of by that
Yeah.
ch- chance passing of being like, oh yeah, I know you through somebody else. But then we started to go, oh, okay, let's look at your work. Like, really like your work, really like the sound of what you're doing. And then again, kind of years pass, and we go, we need somebody to make music for this show. And actually, I can remember this person that we're, you know, friends with, we worked with before, and actually just so happens that we like their product as well, that
Yeah.
like their art. And then so we went to them and we were like, hey, you know, it was Ryan, his name. We were like, Ryan, you know, we'd love for you to come and like do this work with us. He was like, that sounds brilliant. Like he hadn't worked on a theatre show himself, like either. So he was like, it would be a really great learning experience for me as well. So it was very, as I say, like that collaborative process of coming through and joining in that room and just coming up with the ideas with somebody that you already know you get on with. You can't really burn bridges with people because you never know actually who's going to be doing something later on that they might remember you and say, oh my goodness, I remember Lottie. She was like really energetic in like you know, the session or whatever it was, and actually yeah, I'm gonna get in contact with her and see if she wants to come be in this piece. That's kind of the way that we work. So as I say, first and foremost, we go, can we get on with you as a person? Because you might be the most incredible, like creative, like person, and your art might be amazing. But if we can't get on in the room when we're making it, is it worth it? You know?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Because, like, also, even if you're not planning on keeping in contact with people, the industry's so small. Like, I've noticed I see people over and over and over again. Like, I don't even plan on keeping in contact with them. I'm just like, I will see you around because the
Yeah,
industry's so
you end
small.
up at a festival. You end up at a festival and you'll be like, oh, I'll go and see this show. Next thing you know, there's somebody that you recognize on the stage in the show, and you're like, oh my goodness, I've spoken to them. I met them before. I mean, we had it when it was our first year that we went to the Edinburgh Fringe.
Yeah.
We had where there was somebody that was performing a show, and again, we watched their show. We spoke to them afterwards. That was like really interesting. Went our separate ways. Years later, turns out that this person was like the programmer for it was the Camden People's Theatre, and just so happened that they were at a different event that we were at, kind of networking, and we were like, "Oh, you did that show," and he was like, "Oh yeah, I remember you guys." And just off of that, he was like, "Hi, you know, we're actually we've got, you know, got some slots like in the program. I don't know if you want to like come to us like with, you know, a pitch for like your show or whatever." And we're like, absolutely. So we ended up performing at that theater because we remembered this person from years before. And that's why I say, like, you can't burn these bridges. You know, it always pays to be a nice person. It always pays to be a good and kind person and somebody that's energetic and shows passion for the work that they do, because those are the people that, one, are remembered, and two, are wanted by other creatives to be able to work with them. Like, being a good person and bringing good energy into a room is, you know, 80% of what you need in order to kind of make it.
Yeah. And do you think you'd find it much harder to like make work and find opportunities to make work if you weren't working with people who like you're Rendered Retina? You've been friends for ages, like
Yeah. So we met in year 7 at secondary school. That's where we met. We were in different classes in school, and then it just so happened that we'd, you know, we'd met, we, you know, became friends. We started doing drama together. Then when we went to college, just so happened that, you know, we liked the same things, so we ended up doing the same college course. Then through sheer fluke, we ended up doing the same course at university. It wasn't meant to happen like that. It just kind of did. And from that time, and as I say, I always say, like, we were friends first. First and foremost, we're like best friends. And so the work, when we're making work, that relationship naturally comes through in the kind of presentation of what we're doing. So it's, you know, like we've been friends for a long time, and hopefully, and hopefully when you watch a Rendered Retina show, you can tell that there's a kind of like synchronicity. There's a kind of like being in tune with each other. So I know, for example, if something goes wrong, if something happens, whatever that might be, a prop's fallen off the table, or I don't know, something's not where it's meant to be. Like, I know exactly, without even looking at them, I know that one of them is going to do a certain thing to pick that up, because I have, one, full trust in them, and two, again, it's like our minds have kind of synchronized to how each other works. And again, like that, I think, comes through in our work.
I think so. I think it really does. And that's what I've been taught as well. Like, even if you're not really long-term friends, like at National Youth Theatre, I mean, they probably don't want us to say what we did, but like, we had this thing where we had to like look into each other's eyes and be like, these are your people. Like, we support each other. And like, we know that we're going to go out there and whatever happens, we've got each other's backs. And that's kind of the energy that you often need when you're working together.
Totally, because also, none of us are perfect. We're gonna make a mistake at some point, and I tell you now, I make mistakes all the time, as do they. But again, I have the full trust that they will help me out of it, and I will help them out, and it will all be absolutely fine. And if nothing else, it's funny to talk about later on. Like, it's funny to look back at those times where it's like, oh my god, I can't believe I did that thing. It was stupid, but thank goodness you were there. And as I say, like, we're friends as well. So actually coming out of it and being able to laugh about those times and those experience, I think it's like, again, they feed into each other. Our relationship feeds into the work that we make, but actually the work that we make actually then feeds into our relationship as well. So it does, work together. Obviously, there are times where you might not want to work with your closest friends, or some people, a lot of the times I hear is that people don't want to work with their romantic partners, because you can
Yeah.
bring your work into the relationship and that kind of stuff. So I think there is, of course, it might not work for everybody, and a lot of people like to keep those completely separate, which is absolutely fine. um but yeah, for Rendered Retina, it was instrumental to us kind of developing our style, you know.
I think that's really good, and I think it's really nice because otherwise, like, there's so much pressure to be like, I've got to find these people and I've got to find a good enough like concept and starting point to make them stay. And how do I do this? Like, you've got that opportunity to explore without all of that fear.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And likewise, just to add on to that, people also remember the people they didn't like working with. So if, for example, you might have something where you're put in a performance with somebody, or acting in a scene, and that they're a bit, what's the word, divisive, shall we say. Maybe not the nicest person to work with, maybe tells everybody else what to do, maybe tries to step on the director's toes, anything like that. And people remember those individuals as well, and then go, I don't want to work with them in the future. So likewise, they kind of get remembered for the wrong reasons. And and if you're working in a professional capacity, the people that have hired those individuals will also be thinking, "Oh, I don't really want them in my show anymore," or like, I don't want to work with them in the future. So it does work both ways. The good and the bad both get remembered. So as I say, just be nice.
And then you've been doing a lot of work in schools, and I've auditioned for quite a few schools tours since I last saw you. I didn't book any of them, but like, I've been there learning about all these different tours and processes, and there's a lot of chat about like all these different skills that you need to be able to go into schools and perform, and it's very different to normal performing. So what kind of skills do you think you need?
So when we take a show, I'll look at it in that kind of way. When we take a show into a school, um, the difference with taking a show into a school as opposed to a professional venue or professional theatre is that the equipment and the scale of your show is much smaller. So you might have a few lights, or a few, might have a sound set up, but most schools don't have the kind of facilities. Um, if you're lucky, some schools will have a very basic lighting rig. They likely won't have anybody that's actually trained to use the rig, but they might have one, and they'll probably have like an amp system, or like a PA system, so you can like play music through it. But to be honest with you, that's probably the extent of that schools have. So obviously, by that virtue, the show itself really gets kind of like pared down into the most kind of important parts. Don't try and make a show that you're going to take to schools that has like big, like dramatic lighting changes or blackouts, or all that kind of stuff. The schools won't have the facilities to be able to make that work for you. So That's in the first thing. That's just in the making of the show. It needs to be really pared down. But also, by that same token, you as a performer, when you go into the school, you are likely only going in with your other performers and maybe a tech person slash like stage manager. Like, so even the people, the number of people that you're taking into the school with you, because you can't take a full, 40 cast show with like a whole crew and everything. It's just not realistic. It's not going to happen. What tends to happen with school shows is that you turn up in your own car, or maybe there's a van that will bring the set and everybody will get the train or something like that. That tends to be what happens with school shows. So again, you as a performer, you're not just there to do the show and move on. You're there to help set up. You're going to put all the, set all the props, set the stage up, make sure that the sound and the lighting is all set up. You're going to be, of course, communicating with the staff of the school, whether it's the teachers or the admin staff or reception, whatever it is, because also when you're in the school, you have to remember that it is a place, one, of learning, and it's there is there is actual teaching going on in the school, so you can't just turn up and be like yeah messing up, because those kids are actually doing some important work as well. They might have exams coming up. When you're there, you're also setting an example for those
Yes.
kids. You are going to that school because we've worked in schools that are either they're like really like, yeah, we have a really big like drama kind of sector, department, like we've got like a big like arts and teachers and stuff, which is great. Or we've been to schools where they're like, yeah, no, we don't really do arts subjects here. And most of the kids, haven't ever seen a live show or like been to a theater even. And so those are the kinds of extremes. So when you are going there as a performer, like I say, you're not just a performer, you're also there to inspire these young people into, being interested, one, in the arts, but also to see, hey, like they did it and they do it as a job. Like, why can't I do it as well? So
yes,
it's not just turn up and do the job. It's be there, help the rest of the team to set up the show, but then you're also being there to inspire young people to hopefully, if not pursue a career in the arts, but just to engage with it in some way. Because some of them, like I say, we've been to schools where it's the first time they've seen live theatre, and actually being able to bring that opportunity to them to know, so that they know that it exists, that's incredibly valuable in itself. So those are all the kind of things you need to be thinking of when you're going and visiting a school. And all the way that you act, all the language that you use is, influential and can be a powerful, inspiration to these young people.
So like with technical skills, and like lots of them require you to drive and like working with young people, is that stuff that you feel like you need to have like a certain level of skill in order to be able to do this job?
I think it's very interesting. Working with children the children and young people is a very kind of specific discipline. It takes a very kind of specific set of skills, and I think in some ways, to some level, you can prepare that in advance, in some level. But to be honest with you, as with most skills, you learn by the doing of it. So being, if you, I don't know, volunteered to kind of assist some like youth theatre workshops or something like that, you at least then get the chance to see other people working and go, oh, okay. And then if you're lucky, you might have the opportunity to also help run some of those sessions as well, or do some like activities in those sessions as well. So those kinds of skills, they get built up by the doing. However, working with children and young people, there are also other skills that you need that are beyond the arts. So absolutely, you need to be aware of safeguarding. You need to be aware of keeping children safe, and making sure that you're using the correct language, and making sure that you're able to interact with the children in a way that is appropriate for their age or for their level of learning. So of course, I'm not going to go into a primary school, for example, and start using big jargon words, you know, like to throw them off, because they're not at that kind of level, and it makes it more difficult for them to engage. So it is very like, and again, you learn that partially through the doing of it, in terms of the actual the words that you use and their level of understanding. But in terms of the safeguarding the children, your responsibility to safeguard their well-being, and making sure that they're safe, you know, they're safe and enjoying the session at the same time. Those are things you need to be aware of in the beginning. So I would strongly recommend something like, you can attend safeguarding courses. You can find these kinds of like free kind of online things that will help you kind of learn them. You can get like online courses even, the way you can get like certificates in it. Or if you do work as part of a youth theatre or something like that, sometimes the theatre is able to you know, fund those courses for you on your behalf. So learning all of those things are very important before you even start going into the school to deliver on it, because the safeguarding is ultimately the most important thing.
I think so, because I've done safeguarding training before for other different things, and like, without going into detail, when I was doing like an acting class once, there was something really big going on in my personal life at the time, and I felt like I was being like really disruptive. But my acting teacher was like, my job is not about the acting, my job is to make sure everyone in the room is okay. And I think that's important to remember, that there's a different focus when you're working with young people.
Absolutely. And you know, and this kind of goes beyond the working with, even just in everyday life. Sometimes people say things, and now it might be nothing, but if you report that to somebody and you say, this person has said this thing that has made me concerned for them, or something like that, you should always report it. Always report it, because either it's nothing and then that's okay, and then there's absolutely nothing wrong, or it was something and you have done your duty to protect that person and keep that person safe.
So what is your approach with Shakespeare? Like, if I gave you, I know you were like a bit intimidated. Is intimidated the right word? I don't know. Question. But like, if I gave you a speech and I said you've got 2 days to do it, your personal process, what would you do?
Yes. So the reason, not that I was intimidated by it. I said,
That's the wrong word.
no, it wasn't intimidated, but like I said, for me, my process is my process, and I've figured out the way that I work best with it by doing it. So this might not work for you, this might not work for somebody else. Please do not take this as gospel, and I'm certain there are better or more efficient ways of doing it. For a lot of people, obviously Shakespeare, you know, it's almost a second language. You know, it's like it's Greek to me. So that's a little Shakespeare quote for you. But anyway,
I feel like it's so hard, because some people who approach Shakespeare are like knowing all of these different things. Because like, if I say I've done Shakespeare, I like Shakespeare, then they get really technical, and I'm like, I don't know that much. So I feel like it alienates people a lot.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It does alienate a lot of people. But for me, and bearing in mind, obviously, for me, the audiences for for when we make Shakespeare shows and when we perform them, the audiences tend to be people either that aren't really like Shakespeare buffs, like they're not there like, you know, on the regs reading through the complete works. They are people that are like, oh yeah, I remember like Shakespeare from school, or they're children who, again, like I say, just completely just don't get it, just don't understand the language at all. And so it's important that when we make Shakespeare, we're making it as accessible to those people, to our target audience, as possible. Other people, when they learn Shakespeare, I've heard that people like to just read it and just like keep reading it through and just repeating it out loud. I've heard some people that record themselves saying it and then like listen to that on repeat, so they remember the words and then they kind of put the acting on top of it. For me, I learn through the rhythm of the writing, so through the rhythm of the actual speech itself, because as we know, Shakespeare was a poet, often writing in iambic pentameter. So naturally, there's a natural rhythm and kind of cadence that goes with the text. Now, obviously, when we create our versions, we completely cut the text down. So a lot of the time, those rhythms are kind of interrupted, and they don't necessarily flow as Shakespeare had intended. But for me, it's the way that I learn it is through the rhythm of what the text that we have is. So if I go, it quite often happens where I'll read it through and I'll read it to the rhythm. And the reason I can remember it is because it's like a song. You know how people, some people tend to remember song lyrics really easily because you have the music you associate to that part of the song. And it's the same principle when I learn Shakespeare. So I remember the words because I'm remembering the rhythm. And sometimes that means it will get to a point where I'll be like, there's a word here. I know there's a word here that I'm missing.
Yeah.
Because the rhythm's wrong. I just don't know what that word is. And and then sometimes I'll check it and I'll go, oh yeah, it was that word. But it's because I'm able to identify there's a gap here because the rhythm isn't following how it's meant to be. And that's how I learn it. So I learn it through the rhythm and I repeat the words kind of over the top of it. Once I've kind of got that handle of the words, the rhythm, that's when on top of that I then start to go, okay, now let's do the acting part. Let's so obviously as I'm reading it, I'll have an understanding of what the text is saying. So by the point of reading it through, I'll be like, oh yeah, so this line, he means that he's talking about this thing, or he is equating this thing to this thing, and it's a big metaphor, and by that point I'll kind of have that understanding. But this is the point then when I start to go, okay, let me start to now play with this rhythm. There will be certain like punctuation in, for example. Well, let me turn this comma into a full stop and see where that kind of leads me. Let me take a longer pause here and play with that rhythm. Because what happens is by playing with the rhythm, you change the intention of the words that are being said. And this is why I say that might be backwards to some people. Some people prefer to put the emotion in and then put a rhythm to that emotion. I kind of work the other way around. So I let the rhythm inform the emotion. And I like to play around with, like I say, the punctuation. I like to play around with those pauses of introspection and thought. And, for example, if I'll go through the text after I've learned it, I'll go through and I'll go, okay, there's an internal change that happens here. By saying this thing or thinking this thought aloud, there's something that's changed in their perspective and in their attitude. So let me read this with that rhythm and let that change happen within that rhythm, if that makes sense. So it might be like they say something and then I know there's a pause. So let that change happen. And let that then start the next part of the song, if you like. And sometimes you might try things out and you might listen to it back or watch it back and go, that didn't work because I put the pause in the wrong place. It broke up the thought process or it broke up the rhythm of the thing. And that's okay. Like that is, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you have to play with that to be able to find the thing that is one that suits the actual text the best, but also aligns with your interpretation of what the text says, because there isn't like a right or wrong necessarily. There are interpretations to kind of what it is. We have the text of Shakespeare's plays. We don't have recordings from 500 years ago of people what the intention was here. So that's why we find Shakespeare so fascinating, because it can be performed, even though the same play can be performed hundreds, thousands of times. Every single time it's going to be just slightly different. It's going to have a slightly different intention. The actor is going to have interpreted a certain line in a certain way. The director is going to, envision a scene in just a slightly different configuration. And that's what keeps Shakespeare so fresh all these years later.
I think that's so smart because I feel like I do singing lessons and I never worry about like learning the words, but as soon as it's like anything that's just straight acting, I'm like, I can't learn the words. And I have such a different approach to like the story of it and finding the acting through a song compared to. So I think
Yeah,
it's really interesting that you've mixed it.
yeah, and I think that, and maybe this comes back to the experiences, or kind of the background of like commedia and clowning and
Yeah.
those kind of mime and those kinds of physical theaters, because I would say that the in fact, what's just as important as the action is the inaction, the
Yeah.
moments of pause and the freezes, and actually the moments of stillness are where the real like emotions take place. And I think
Yes.
that as an actor, it can be very like, you can get into this sense of like, and the words are the most important thing. I need to read the words exactly as they're written, and I need to make sure I get these lines out. But actually, it's those pauses where, like I said, you have the change in perspective of the character.
So true, because we learned actually at my old acting class that it's not like there's words and silences. We say words to fill the silence. And it's so interesting as well that like you think there's all these different versions that you can have. Because sometimes like I was auditioning for Juliet and I was like, I feel like there's an idea of what Juliet's like. And I
Mm.
feel like what I'm doing is so different. And I'm like, will I be like, is it wrong? What do I do?
And I don't think, and it's not wrong. There isn't a wrong. It's just whether that interpretation is right for this other person's interpretation
Yeah,
that they want to be putting on. And I think it's not a wrong. It's absolutely not a matter of right and wrong.
I think that's good to hold on to because you can get so like, I don't think I'm doing this right, or like there's so many people who know more about like the history element of Shakespeare, and that's I think there's certain techniques that you can know, but like I think sometimes there's an expectation that people feel like they have to know absolutely everything, and you
No,
don't have to.
yeah, absolutely. I do. I think you're right. And again, I think that's what scares people so much about Shakespeare. They're like, oh, I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to say this line wrong, or I don't want to pronounce this character's name the wrong way, or all
Yeah,
these kinds of things. And I think that that's why a lot of people not only just don't want to touch it because they're like, I don't want to mess it up, but have the I don't know what the word is, the fear, I suppose, of being laughed at or getting it wrong. But actually, it's not about that. It's about trying and finding those interpretations of the thing.
I think that's so useful. I think you've forever changed the way I approach Shakespeare now.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. I'm glad. I'm glad. I know it sounds counterintuitive a lot of the time. The way that I go about things can be quite counterintuitive. Like I say, my advice to you as an actor is take more time not acting, or like in the pause of the words that you're saying, and like it feels backwards. Like, surely I should be thinking about the words that I'm saying, but no, stillness, the art of stillness is very important. And like you say, you use the words to fill the silence, and like that's and you can tell that with people. um you can tell when somebody's confident just in their own skin because they're fine with letting the moment hang.
I think that's so good. I actually need to tape a Shakespeare piece quite soon. I feel like that is a way to mix it up, try something new.
Yeah, totally. And don't get me wrong, like you might have this thing where you're like really taking these long pauses and stuff like that, which is brilliant. But also sometimes the scene that you're in, you kind of need to just get through it. Like you can't take
Yeah, I think
huge
so.
long pauses with everything that you say, because there's a runtime for the show. Of course, if I did that in every speech that I did, our Shakespeare's wouldn't be an hour long. There'd be
Yeah,
two. I mean, they would be forever. So use it like use it sparingly. Use it
I
like
will use it carefully because also like you have to keep the stakes. Like it's good to think like, oh, there's a certain amount of time I need to tell this information to this person right now because something depends on it. Because otherwise, it can start to feel like pauses are empty.
Yeah, totally.
And speaking about Rendered Retina again, that sounded so passive aggressive.
I can't speak about any other company, I'm afraid.
How does it work with like other jobs? Like, how full-time are you in this work, and what are your goals moving forward? What are Rendered Retina doing next?
All three of us have other jobs in addition to the making of the theatre, so of the work. Now, what I'd probably say is that actually most recently we've been focusing a lot more on the kind of school stuff, so doing more workshops rather than the creating of new work, um, because we have all, again, got other jobs, other responsibilities outside of work. The company has been pretty chilled recently. Like I say, we've been doing a lot of like more like school stuff and just kind of workshops, which has been really, really nice for us to kind of like chill back, like sit back and be able to just kind of like enjoy that beyond sitting in a room and going, we need to make this scene, like I need to like have this like thing. It's a really nice kind of dynamic. In terms of how that fits with our work, I don't really know, to be honest with you. It's still important to us, that there's no doubt about that. We're still doing it and we're continuing to do it. We're not gonna be like, that's it, we're done with Rendered Retina anytime soon, at least. So but of course, the other jobs also have to be kind of worked around, and Rendered Retina stuff needs to, fit in with the rest of life as well. So, as it stands, we're lucky because it is our company. We, as long as we're communicating with each other about our availability and what we have going on, then it's fine. We can easily work around. Some days the school might come to us and say, "Can you do a workshop on this day?" And there will always be at least one person that's able to go and deliver. What's next for Rendered Retina? Well, we're going to be at Prague Fringe Festival at the end of May. So I'm going to get the dates before I get them wrong. So we are there from the 27th until the end of the week. So I'll be there until the 2nd. We're going to be at the Prague Fringe Festival with King John. I'm sure that Lottie will put the link to tickets down below. If you fancy a holiday to Prague, we're going to be there with King John. I love it because the whole point of our version of King John is that it's widely regarded as Shakespeare's worst play. So the point of our version is to show everybody, no, it's actually the best play. And we try and make it the most epic thing you've ever seen. There's some really catchy songs in it and some really silly jokes, which is very in keeping with Rendered Retina style. If I do say so myself, it's a very fun show. It's not, like I said, it's not, proper Shakespeare, but it's a good time, if nothing else.
Do people dislike King John then? Because someone lent me the RSC's King John from like a few years ago on DVD. It didn't seem that unpopular of a version, is it?
I don't think it's not
Or is
necessarily
it?
the version. It's the play itself.
Wow.
It's one of the histories, right? So it's very political. It's very like lots of names, lots of things happen off stage. Like you hear about things. And like I say, if you're not a histories person, because I think it can be a lot like Marmite. If you're not into history, it can be a bit like, I don't know who this person is. Like, okay, King John, obviously, King John was an actual king of England, and he did get the throne, and he was a terrible king, and like he lost loads of wars against France, and like there is this whole subplot about the church and his relationship with it, and the Pope is involved, and this person who is the the son, the illegitimate child of this person who is this person in history, and Richard the Lionheart. And if you're not history inclined, it can be very, this is boring, because it's just a lot of kind of name dropping and political maneuverings. But again, in our version, we try and take all of those things that kind of like happen off the stage and put them onto the stage, and that's part of the show. Like, look, it's this whole fight isn't in the play. It happens off the stage, but we're going to put it on the stage just for you. Like, this is what we
Is that
imagine.
what you say?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a whole song
Oh,
about a fight between King John and King Philip, and like it's obviously because it's silly and it's or because it happens all off the stage. We're like, yeah, this crazy thing happened where like King John, he picked up 20 horses and like literally just threw them. He just threw them at the French army. It was crazy. Um, and that's part of the fun and the
oh,
joke of our version of King John. Um, yeah.
yeah. So go watch it, I think is the
Please
moral.
do. Yes, come and see King John in Prague. If nothing else, Prague's a lovely city. It's our third time performing at the Fringe there, so it's always a great time. And there's also lots of other shows on that are brilliant. So yeah, if you can, come on over.
So thank you so much, Jordan, for coming to a part three. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and again, thank you for listening to me ramble about some things. And I do hope that for you or for anybody watching, that somebody found something interesting in what I've said.
I know they do. People tell me they do, and it's been an honor to have you back again.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be back. Thank you.
But if you can't make it to Prague at the end of May, genuinely, I would still say their shows are so worth watching. I have brought my entire family to see their shows, and genuinely, my whole family have thought very highly of them. So definitely follow their social media linked below to find out any other opportunities that you'll be able to watch them perform. And thank you so much to everyone for watching my part 3 with Rendered Retina. Thank you. Bye.